my dear. Come sit here beside Grandma. Have you had your tea yet? It's still warm. Go ahead. I always say fennel tea with a little honey can cure even old sadness. And today I woke up with a weight on my chest, as if an old memory had nudged me in my sleep. And when that happens, well, it means the memory wants to be told. Are you curious to find out how it all happened? Then subscribe to the channel now and leave a comment telling me where you're listening to this story from. I love to know where you're following me from. And look, if I were you, I wouldn't miss what's coming up. The truth I'm about to reveal will move you in ways you can't even imagine. Are you ready? You know, as we get older, our minds become like little cabinets full of drawers. Some we lock and try to forget they're even there. Others stay slightly open, letting out the scent of things long tucked away. Old clothes, faded photographs. But some days, my child, some days, one of those drawers opens all by itself. And today was one of those days. Now then, I've never told this to anyone. Not to your aunts, not to your uncles, not even to your grandfather when he was still alive. I kept it hidden, like a knife inside my dress, out of sight, but always pressing against the skin. You remember your grandfather Joachim, don't you? A quiet man, soft-spoken, hands thick from years of tilling soil and building walls. A good father, a good provider, as folks used to say. We married young. I was barely out of girlhood, and he was already a grown man. And me, I was in love. That kind of love only naive girls know. The kind that believes in everything, that trusts the other's heart, is as clean as our own. We lived many years in this very house you're sitting in now. The kitchen tiles are still the same. The rose bush outside. I planted it in our first month of marriage. It grew wild and strong, just like I wish I had been. But in those days, my dear, women weren't raised to be wild. We were taught to be good wives, good homemakers, good mothers. And the rest we swallowed. I had 4 children with your grandfather, raised them with hard work and prayer. We woke before the sun and only lay down once it had long set. Even with all the struggle, I loved my life. I loved seeing the clothes drying on the line, the smell of beans on the wood stove, the sound of children running through the yard. Everything felt right, or at least I made it seem that way. But not everything was what it seemed, my dear. And that's what I want to tell you today. Your grandfather had secrets. Not the kind of obvious filthy secrets that show up in shouting matches or slammed doors. No, his were quiet. Like the cracks in the old porch tiles, they took years to show. And when I noticed, they'd already been there a long time. I only found out the truth after he died. He'd been ill for months, faded slowly, like the last embers in a fireplace. He didn't want to go to a hospital, said he wanted to die at home, in our bed, and he got his wish. On a cold July morning, he fell asleep and never woke again. After the burial came the days of silence, the kind where time feels like a wet cloth, too heavy to hang. The children returned to their homes, the pots stopped boiling, and it was just me, the wall clock, and the creaking of old wood in the living room. It was during one of those days that I decided to go through his things, not out of anger, not even out of longing, just a pull I couldn't explain. I went to the bedroom, opened the big wardrobe, the one he had made from pinewood, remember? And began folding his clothes one by one. At the back of the wardrobe, I found the chest, a dark wooden chest with rusty hinges. He always said it just held old paperwork, bills, tax slips. I'd never touched it, but that day, the key appeared as if by magic, inside a little sewing box. I took the key, took a deep breath, and opened it. Inside was what he'd said, paperwork, old documents, notebooks, yellowed letters. But in the middle of it all was a notebook, hardcover, navy blue, faded with age. I picked it up, flipped through the pages. It was a diary. Yes, my dear, a diary. Your grandfather, that quiet man of few words, he wrote. The first pages were simple. Work at the construction site, a rainy day delaying the job, back pain that wouldn't go away. I kept reading, hearing his voice between the lines, as if he were sitting right next to me, whispering. For a moment I missed him, a deep, burning sort of ache that wraps around your insides. But as I read on, something began to change. The words grew heavier, full of feeling. He wrote of things he never told me aloud, fears, desires, doubts. And then a name appeared, A name that made me drop the notebook onto my lap and stare into space like I'd been slapped across the face. Lourdes, my sister. Yes, my dear. Your great-aunt Lourdes. But that's a story that needs to be told carefully. Because what I found in that diary changed everything I thought I knew about the man I slept beside for nearly half a century. Do you really want to hear it? Then have another sip of your tea. What comes next isn't easy, nor pretty, but it's true. And sometimes the truth needs to be heard too. My dear, life was different back then. There was none of this running around, no telephones ringing every hour, no television shouting bad news all day. We lived by the rhythm of daylight and darkness. We rose with the rooster's call and slept when the silence took over the house. It was a simple life, but full of meaning, even if we didn't notice that at the time. Our day began before the sun even stirred. Joaquim would get up slowly, sit at the edge of the bed, pull on his boots, and go check on the chickens. I, on my side, would shuffle to the wood-burning stove to light the fire. Some days the wood was damp, and getting it to catch was a task. But the smell of that first morning smoke mixed with the scent of fresh coffee brought me such peace. We took our coffee in silence. He ate bread with butter, sometimes a bit of banana with flour, and always drank his coffee strong and bitter, without sugar. I liked mine with just a drop of milk, to soften the taste. He would read a few notes from the job site. He never talked much about work, but I knew he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. The children came after, running, eyes still sticky with sleep and hair pointing in all directions. Each one grabbed what food they could from the table while I chased them with towels, shoes, and combs. It was a battle to get everyone out the door on time. Joachim had already left by the time the last of them crossed the gate with a satchel on his back. Once the house was empty, it was my time to tend to the day. I washed clothes at the washboard with stone soap, scrubbing hard at the collars and cuffs of Joachim's shirts. I hung everything neatly on the clothesline. My mother used to say well-hung clothes showed a tidy woman. I swept the cement floors of the veranda, fed the animals, and tended to the garden at the back. The soil was tough but generous. Carrots, lettuce, collard greens, everything we planted grew proud. At midday, when the sun beat down on the roof and the church bell from the street above rang out, I would already be in my apron, stirring a pot of beans. The food was simple, but made with care and hand and heart. Loose white rice, fried eggs, a slow-cooked meat that had been stewing since early morning, full of the scent of garlic and golden onion. Some days Joachim came home for lunch, other days not. When he did, he ate quietly, wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin, and went back out. Joachim was never one for conversation, but I understood his silence. In the afternoon, the work continued. I mended the children's clothes, patched up Joachim's worn-out socks, crocheted for the neighbors. When I had time, I would sit in the straw chair on the veranda and watch the street go by. Children coming and going, peddlers knocking at doors, neighbors gossiping by their gates. Late afternoon was my favorite part. The sky would change colors, the birds would grow restless in the trees, and the air smelled sweeter. I would brew another pot of coffee, set a cornmeal cake on the table, and soon the children would be back, sweaty, with dirt-stained knees from playing in the yard. Each one told their piece of the day, all talking at once, and I'd laugh to myself in the middle of all that fuss. That was when the house breathed again. At night, after supper, a lighter meal, just some broth, bread, or leftovers, we gathered in the front room. Joachim sat with his little radio tuned to the news. The boys did schoolwork, argued over pencils and notebooks. I sat with my sewing or embroidery, though often I just watched them, trying to memorize every detail. The way one frowned, the other chewed his nails, the youngest asleep, leaning on his brother's shoulder. Bedtime came early. By 8 or 9, the house was wrapped in darkness. Joachim would lie down and fall asleep within minutes. I took longer. I lay there listening to the night's sounds, the wind brushing the window, the clock ticking from the living room, the soft steps of a cat on the roof. Sometimes I dozed off thinking about tomorrow, the bills to pay, the shoes already growing too tight on the children's feet. But even with all that, there was a kind of peace. It was a life without luxury, but not without beauty. The beauty lived in the small things, the smell of the coffee, the warmth of the stove, the folded clothes, the goodnight kiss, and I was proud of that. I felt like my whole world lived inside those walls, that yard, that man who slept beside me, even if he was made more of silence than words. Now, looking back, I wonder if I was truly happy or if I simply became used to it all. But I think in those days, we didn't ask ourselves such things. To be happy meant to have a home, a meal, and good health. And that we had. Death, my dear, never asks for permission. Sometimes it arrives like thunder, frightening everyone, shaking the ground beneath our feet. Other times, like in your grandfather's case, it comes like a fog, slowly settling into the body, dimming the light in the eyes, weakening every movement, silencing the voice without urgency. Joachim started falling ill in an April month, one of those where the wind still smells like summer but carries a chill that warns of change. At first, I thought it was just tiredness. He was quieter than usual, sleeping too much, eating too little. When I asked if anything hurt, he would answer in that calm way of his, "It's just the weather, Maria." But the weather doesn't do that. The weather doesn't steal the shine from your eyes or drain the color from your skin. By May, he was no longer going out to work. He'd sit in the chair by the window for hours, looking out at the street like he was waiting for something that never came. We called the doctor, a kind man, one who had seen us through many winters. He examined Joachim, listened to his chest, looked into his eyes. In the end, he pulled me aside, rubbed the back of his neck and said, "Maria, prepare your heart." The illness, whatever name it had, was one of those folks didn't speak out loud in those days. Or maybe the doctor spared me the words out of compassion. He only said it would be slow, but certain. "It's like a candle, ma'am," he said. "It will go out quietly." From that day on, my world began to shift. The children came more often, bringing fruit, newspapers, and hopeful words. The neighbors whispered as they passed by the gate. The house filled with a strange kind of silence, heavy, damp. I carried on pretending there was a routine, but inside, I was already preparing for the emptiness. I cared for him with all the tenderness I had. I made him porridge, bathed him, combed his hair with a gentleness I didn't know I still possessed. Joachim never complained. Sometimes he smiled faintly. Sometimes he looked at me deeply, as if trying to say something he no longer had the strength to say. That last week felt like time itself had stopped. The mornings came slowly. The cold bit at the windows, and the wood-burning stove seemed unable to warm the whole house. I sat by his bedside, telling old stories, speaking of the children, the crops, the smell of fresh corn cake. He listened in silence, squeezing my hand now and then. In the early hours of the 23rd of July, and see, I don't even know how I remember the date so clearly, but it is etched into me like a brand on wood. He passed. There was no sound, just a sigh, the quiet extinguishing of a candle, just as the doctor had said. I was there, my hand resting on his, and I felt his skin grow cold. I looked at his face, peaceful, more peaceful than I'd seen in years. I kissed his forehead and understood, without anyone telling me, that he was no longer there. Mourning, my dear, is a garment we wear on the inside. On the outside, we wear black, lower our voices, close the curtains. But inside, oh, inside, it is all noise. In the days that followed, I did all as tradition demanded. The wake was in the front room, candles lit, prayers led by old Adelaide. Neighbors brought coffee, sweetbreads, handkerchiefs. The children fell silent, as if they understood everything. My daughter's eyes shimmered with tears. The boys didn't know where to put their hands. And me, I stood upright, because that's what people expect of a widow. We buried Joachim late in the afternoon, with a copper-colored sky above us, and my hands cold from holding so many memories. Coming home without him, that was the hardest part. The bedroom felt too big, the bed too spacious, the house too empty of things that couldn't be seen, his whistle when walking in, the scuff of his boots on the floor, the clearing of his throat before breakfast. Even the sounds I never knew I'd miss had gone. Absence has a sound, my child, and it is the loudest sound there is. I spent many nights awake. I touched his things, folded clothes no one would wear again, stored away shoes that still held the shape of his feet. I found old notes, bookmarks, a handkerchief with my name embroidered on it. Each object was a sigh, but I also learned that grief carves us from the inside out. It makes us hollow for a while, then rebuilds us in another shape, not whole, but hardened. Longing becomes part of the soul's furniture. And I carried on, not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice. After Joachim was buried, my dear, the house echoed with a silence that clung to the walls. The wood in the furniture creaked as if it were protesting his absence. The wall clock seemed to tick louder than ever. And I moved slowly, as though every step landed on a memory. In those first days, I did everything on autopilot. Woke early, lit the stove, put the coffee to drip, but no one sat in his chair anymore. His favorite mug stayed in the rack, untouched, and the tablecloth, which he always straightened with his fingers, stayed crooked for days. One of those empty mornings, with the house still in mourning, I decided to go through his things, not out of curiosity, nor longing. It was more like a need, as if tidying his belongings would somehow help me reorganize my own heart. I went into the bedroom, the one we had shared for so many decades. I opened the solid wooden wardrobe, the one he had helped assemble when we bought the house. It still smelled the same. Stored clothes, dry soap, and something faint and old, like time itself. I folded his shirts one by one, the light linen ones he wore on Sundays, the plaid flannel ones for chilly days, the more worn jackets he used for doctor visits or the funerals of old friends. I stored everything in cloth bags, just like my mother had taught me, with cloves to keep time at bay. That was when I reached the back of the wardrobe and saw the trunk. I had always known it was there, a dark wooden trunk with rusty hinges and an old lock. It was a plain object, no decoration, no secrets on the surface, but it had always given me a faint prickle of suspicion. When I asked what was in it, Joachim would say, "Old papers, tax things, nothing important." And I, busy with children, meals, and life, never insisted. But that day, something made me kneel before it. I ran my hand over the lid, felt the fine dust cling to my fingers. The lock was still firm, and as if it had been waiting, the key turned up. Inside a little sewing box, tucked under an embroidered cloth I had made in my youth. The key slid in easily, but the trunk groaned as it opened, as if it didn't appreciate being disturbed after all those years. Inside, I found what he had said. Papers, yes, but much more. Folded letters, old bills, notes scribbled on yellowing pages, small black and white photos. Everything smelled of being tucked away, of secrets and time withheld. In the middle of it all was a notebook, a hard blue cover, worn and scuffed along the edges. I picked it up gently, as if holding something alive and afraid. The notebook was full of handwritten pages. It was Joachim's handwriting, unmistakable, slightly crooked, the kind of penmanship that comes when you learn late in life. I sat on the edge of the bed and began to leaf through it. The first pages spoke of everyday matters: rain delaying a construction job, a coworker's injury, rising cement prices. Small things, made intimate by their ordinariness. As I read, I could almost hear his voice, that low murmur of a man who spoke little but thought much. Gradually, the tone of the pages changed. The sentences grew longer, heavier. He had written down feelings he had never said aloud, fears, doubts, longings. It was as if I were speaking to a part of him that had always been hidden from me. And there, my child, there began the story that changed everything. But that, I will only tell you if you're truly ready. Because what is written in that notebook isn't just memory, it is a wound. And old wounds, when touched, still hurt. I can't say, my dear, how long I sat there, with that notebook in my hands. The world around me seemed to disappear. The house was so quiet I could hear the creak of the chair, the breeze slipping through the half-shut window, and even the sound of my own heart, slow, heavy, as if it already knew what was coming. That notebook, the one he had called Old Papers, was not just a stack of pages. It was a mirror, a dusty, hidden mirror that suddenly forced me to look at a man I thought I knew entirely. Joachim's handwriting was the same I saw in the notes he left on the table, the slips stuck with a magnet to the refrigerator door, firm but hurried. He wrote like a man who needed to free the words from his chest before they dried up. The first pages, as I told you, were about everyday life, things from the job site, the weather, the ache in his knee. Simple words, but soon, the tone began to shift. Gradually, the sentences grew heavier, more personal. And that, my dear, is where what I now call your grandfather's other life began. A life not lived in our shared days, but in the margins. In the hours I thought he was at work or going to bed early. A parallel world, whispered only to paper. What hurt me most was realizing how full of feeling his writing was. There was love in the words, love for someone who wasn't me, and that was like swallowing thorns. I remember one page in particular. He wrote about a cloudy afternoon, about a perfume in the air, about an encounter that left him at peace. He used those words. I felt a peace that even the silence of my home doesn't give me. When I read that, the blood drained from my face, because that house, that silence, they were mine. It was the home we built together. And he wrote as if it were a place of shadows, colorless, foreign. With each page, I unraveled a thread of memories. I began to spot gaps, disappearances, little excuses that once seemed harmless. Now, they had another meaning. They were shadows, not erased by time, only covered by the veil of routine. He spoke of her without saying her name, as if protecting a secret still burning. But I knew. I knew by the way he described her, by the gestures he wrote down, by how he wrote about her laughter, her way of tying up her hair. And the more I read, the more it became certain inside me, a suspicion I never thought I would feel. It was Lourdes, my sister. I closed the notebook that very moment. My whole body trembled. It was as if I had discovered I'd lived beside a stranger for decades, that while I was making lunch, tending the children, he was finding time to live another love, hidden, silent, but no less real. It took me days to gather the courage to open that notebook again, but it felt like it called to me, like a muffled voice rising from under the ground. I needed to understand, not just what he had done, but why, and how, and for how long. I read on, page by page, and each one felt like a new knife, sharper than the last. And yet, in some strange way, it also felt like hearing his voice one last time, as if he had left that diary so I could truly know him. Not the man who shared my bed, but the man who gave his heart to someone else. And that's how I discovered what perhaps no one else ever knew. The diary was hidden, yes, but inside it was a truth that screamed, and I, though wounded, was forced to listen. The first time I truly sat down to read that notebook, my dear, was on an afternoon when the sky seemed to carry the same weight I held in my chest. The clouds hung low and gray, and there was that scent in the air, the smell of rain that hasn't fallen yet, but already wets the soul. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in the rocking chair on the porch, and let the world outside slip away. The notebook weighed more than paper in my hands. It felt like each page held a piece of the life I thought I knew. It was like stepping into a room in the house that had always been locked, but where you'd often heard whispers through the crack in the door. I began reading slowly, as if walking on wet ground. His words were short, but behind them was silence, a deep one. I could feel how he saw things, how he processed the world. There was something beautiful in it, and that, my dear, was what hurt the most, because what I was reading wasn't just a betrayal. It was a part of him that had never belonged to me. Somewhere around the first 20 or 30 pages, there were pieces that made me smile. Memories of our children's early days, the time we bought the refrigerator, or the day the dog vanished for 3 days and came back covered in mud. And for a few moments, I forgot why I had opened that notebook at all. It felt like speaking with him after his death, a conversation with no interruptions, where he finally said what he had never spoken. But then, the longing became something else. I don't know if it was anger, or hurt, or a kind of soul-deep tiredness, because soon came the other part, the hidden part. It was strange how he wrote about that other presence, someone I knew so well, with such sweetness. He described moments with a lightness he never used with me. Small things, a laugh, a little gesture, a glance from the corner of her eye, words he never gave me, but had written with such care. And still there I was, reading the very words that wounded me. And I felt longing for him, for the time before I knew. Because in those days, despite it all, I was happy in my ignorance. It's hard to say this, but it's true. Sometimes we miss even the lie when the truth arrives too late. I closed the notebook at the end of that afternoon. The rain finally came, as if the sky could no longer hold itself together either. And I cried. Not a loud, desperate cry. No. It was the kind of cry that comes from long ago, muffled, the kind that runs slow and stays tucked behind your eyes. Because that day, my dear, I buried your grandfather for the second time, not his body, but the image I had carried of him. After that first reading, my dear, I began to see the past with different eyes. It was as though every old memory now had a new shape, a new light, as if I were watching my own life from the outside through a lens I'd never had before. A harder one that showed me things I never thought to notice. I started remembering little things, silly, maybe, small details, but together they formed a trail, a thread of loose stitches I never had the courage or perhaps the will to piece together. I remembered one Sunday, sometime back in the year of 1972, when Lourdes came to stay with us for a few weeks. She had recently separated, said she needed time away from the city, and I, being a good sister, opened our home. I thought it'd be good to have another woman around the house, someone to share the cooking, the afternoon chats, the care of the children. And for a while it was. Lourdes had always had that gentle way about her. Easy laughter, light voice, a way of making herself liked. The children adored her. And Joaquim, well, at the time I thought it was sweet how kindly he treated her. I took it as politeness, the respect of a brother-in-law. But now, looking back, I see things I didn't want to see. The way his eyes followed her when she entered the room, the pause before he'd answer when I called, the whispered conversations that ended the moment I came close, always claiming to be about family. I also recalled one afternoon when I went to buy fabric at Dona Alzira's little shop. When I returned, the house was too quiet. I didn't hear the children. I stepped inside and found them in the kitchen. She was washing dishes, he was drying them. They were smiling. A calm smile, too calm, too familiar, the kind you share when holding a secret. Back then, I shook the image from my mind. Who was I to suspect my own sister, the father of my children? But now I understand. The body senses what the heart pretends not to feel. And I felt it, yes. I just chose silence. And there were other things. A note I found in his pants pocket, written in a woman's hand, unsigned. A handkerchief that wasn't mine, folded in the back of the wardrobe. The night he claimed to be staying at the work site, but came home the next morning smelling of a perfume that wasn't mine. Sweeter, unfamiliar. They were signs, small ones, almost invisible. But now, after reading the diary, they're all clear, like footprints made visible after the rain. And I ask myself, did he know that I knew? Does guilt belong only to the one who betrays, or also to the one who chooses not to see? Today, with all the years resting on my shoulders, I think maybe I did know. Deep down, some part of me cried out. But back then, women kept more silence than words. And I kept silent to save what I believed was my family. But the truth is, you cannot save what's already falling apart inside. The moment I saw her name written there, in the middle of the notebook's pages, it was as if someone had pulled the air right out of my chest. Lourdes. 4 letters that always sounded like family, like blood, like shared childhood. And suddenly, they cut like a blade. He wrote it casually, as if jotting down any other name. Saw Lourdes near the market today. She smiled like in the days when everything was simple. A small sentence, almost innocent, but it pierced me like a hot needle. Because in that instant, there was no more doubt. The secret had a face, and it was hers, my sister, the one who slept in our guest bed, who watched my children take their first steps, who mourned with me when our mother passed, the one I defended from our father's harshness, stood up for when others said she was too dreamy, too irresponsible. My sister. And there she was, etched into the most private corners of the man I had shared a bed with for nearly 50 years. The world spun. My vision darkened. The ground felt far away. I closed the notebook, dropped it in my lap, and stared into the yard as if seeing it for the first time. Everything felt foreign. The rosebush I had planted with such care, the clothesline, the old wooden bench. Everything seemed to look back at me, as if it too had known the truth I had just uncovered. Memories flooded in. Lourdes helping me fold Joaquim's shirts, laughing at the boys' jokes, offering coffee in that soft voice of hers that never rose. What I once thought sweet now looked like theater. And what hurt even more was realizing that I didn't feel anger toward her, at least not right away. What I felt was a kind of shame, a humiliation so deep not even tears could come. It was as if the entire world had deceived me, and I had played the fool, willingly blind. Reading her name, nestled quietly among all those words, made me understand that there had been 2 loves in his life, and I was only one of them. Maybe the official one, the one at the altar, the one on paper, the one who shared his silence at night. But she was the other, the hidden one. Perhaps the one he truly wanted, but never had the courage to keep. And the worst part, she was alive, still is, lives in a care home not far from here, alone, no children, no husband. A woman aged by time, and maybe by regret too. That day, I felt something inside me break, but also, for the first time, I began to understand that there are things I would never understand. And maybe living is just that. Carrying questions like photographs tucked away in a purse. You know they're there, but you don't always have the strength to look at them. My dear, some pain doesn't need to be screamed. Some words hurt more precisely because they are said so quietly. And the words I read in that notebook, those words still cut through me like a cold blade. There were no accusations, no outright confessions, just fragments of thought, left on the page like someone writing only to himself, believing no one would ever read them. But I did, and it was as though each line whispered what he never had the courage to say aloud. He wrote about her with a tenderness that stung, soft words, small memories told gently. He said there was in her a freedom that escapes me, a laughter that does not judge, a presence that soothes. It burned me from within. Because what was left for me? What did I represent? If the lightest, truest parts of his heart were given to someone else, there was no anger in his writing, no regret either. It was a soft kind of longing, the kind that has grown old and settled. He didn't say he loved me less, but he also didn't say he loved me more. It was as though my love had been the right one, and hers, the real one. And that distinction, my child, is what wounded me the most. I had spent an entire lifetime trying to be everything to him. Wife, friend, support, silence, presence, home. And there in those worn pages, I found that he had loved in another way, in a place I never had access to. There was one passage that made me shut the notebook with a snap, as if trying to silence a scream. He had written, "Sometimes I wonder how life might have been if I had chosen differently. But then I come back to my home, I see the faces around the table, and I understand that love, sometimes, is not a choice. It is a duty." That felt like a slap, followed by a soft pat. I sat there, frozen, trying to decide whether it was comfort or punishment. Did he love me? He did. But he loved me with the weight of obligation, not the fire of desire. And that, my dear, is a kind of love that wears you down. His words didn't betray me only because of what they said. They betrayed me because they put me in a place I never thought I'd be, the place of the woman tolerated, not the woman wanted. And understand, it wasn't hate I felt. It was a weariness, as old as the love itself, the weight of having carried alone the fantasy of an us that deep down had never been whole. Betrayal, my dear, doesn't have to be recent to hurt. Time doesn't heal everything, no. Some pains, time just pushes into the corners of the soul, like dust gathering where no one bothers to clean. And when you bump into it, without meaning to, the pain rises like a cloud and chokes you. That's what I felt as I kept reading Joachim's diary. Most of what he wrote was from many years ago. From the tone, from the words, I could tell it all happened when our children were still little, when the house was still full of noise and giggles and footsteps running across the floor. While I ran back and forth keeping everything in place, he was writing about her. While I stirred the beans and folded the laundry, he was scribbling about her perfume, the way she furrowed her brow, the soft way her hand touched his arm. It was an old betrayal, not the kind caught in some dramatic scene. No, it was the kind that hides in silence, that lives beneath routine, like roots buried deep under hard soil. But what hurt the most was realizing that even though it was something from long ago, it was still alive in me, because the body remembers, the skin remembers, and the eyes, they never forget. I began to recall details, nights when he turned his back to sleep without even saying goodnight, mornings when he avoided my gaze, family parties where she was also present, and they exchanged quick glances, which I had once taken as the habits of relatives. Now they looked like signs, codes, sins tucked inside ordinary gestures. I began to understand why her presence had always left me slightly uneasy, a discomfort I couldn't explain. She came to birthdays, brought gifts for the grandchildren, laughed at Joachim's jokes, and I laughed too, pretending everything was fine. Perhaps I even pretended for myself. Their betrayal wasn't recent, but the damage was fresh, like an old cut that never truly healed and starts bleeding again with the slightest touch. I felt it, the bleeding of memory. And it made me wonder, my dear, does every love eventually betray? Or is it that we convince ourselves the other person belongs to us entirely? I don't know. All I know is that even after so much time, even after he was gone, even after the diary had been closed and reopened again and again, the pain was still there, as if everything had happened just yesterday, as if the past still lived inside me, like an unwanted guest who refuses to leave. My dear, they say anger is a fire, and maybe it is, but what I felt, after everything I read in that notebook, wasn't a fire that blazes and burns itself out. It was a smothered heat, steady, thick, like the kind that comes before a storm, a quiet kind of rage, old, one that had never been given space to grow, but that, in the pages of that diary, finally found fertile ground. I found myself filled with a silent fury. I walked through the house with clenched fists, as if my own body didn't know where to send all that emotion. Sometimes I wanted to scream, to break things, to tear that notebook into pieces and throw it in the stove. Other times I simply sat on the kitchen floor and cried, not knowing if I was crying for me, for him, or for the story that had never been told. The confusion was so great, even the good memories began to ache. I thought about the trips we had taken, the birthdays, the quiet joys, and I asked myself, which part of it was real? Which part did he live with me fully? And which part did he live only halfway? I went days without speaking. I locked the diary away in the wardrobe, but the words were already inside me. Those small letters had taken root, and every time I looked in the mirror, it felt like I was seeing a different woman. A woman deceived, yes, but also a woman stronger, more aware, more real. And then another thing came, guilt. I began to wonder if, in some way, I had played a part in it all. Had I been too distracted? Too quiet? Too hard? While I was taking care of everything, had I forgotten to take care of us? But then the anger returned, unwilling to share space with doubt. I hadn't been less than he needed. I had been everything. Everything he never had the courage to say he didn't want. And that, my dear, is what confuses the most, because anger demands justice, but sadness seeks comfort. And between one and the other, I remained. Standing in the house where I built my life, trying to understand when the truth was lost, or if it had ever been whole to begin with. After the anger eased a little, and the tears too, what remained was silence. But it was no longer the same silence as before. It was a silence filled with echoes, a silence that answered with memories, every question I asked without words. That's when I started revisiting the past, not with longing, but with a magnifying glass. Like someone walking an old path again, this time looking for the potholes they once thought were smooth roads. I began confronting the memories, one by one, as if they were parts of an embroidery that, when examined up close, revealed all its messy knots. I remembered the day we celebrated 25 years of marriage. Joachim took me to a modest restaurant, ordered a cheap wine, and spoke little, as always. I had dressed up, felt pretty, and expected sweet words, but all he said was, "We're doing fine, aren't we?" At the time, I thought that was just his way. Today, I wonder, was that doing fine just resignation? I remembered a trip we took to visit relatives out in the countryside. He was distant the whole time, said he was tired, hadn't slept well, but now and then, he'd disappear during the day, said he was going for a walk. Back then, I didn't ask questions. Now I wonder, who was he thinking of as he wandered those streets alone? I remembered birthdays of mine that he forgot, gifts he bought in haste, without thought. Small things, perhaps, but now they seemed large, because when love is whole, even forgetting carries affection. But when something's hidden, forgetting feels like neglect. I also started going through old photographs, pictures of the whole family together. In some, Lourdes appeared. I looked at her differently now, at how she leaned toward him, the way she smiled. Back then, I thought it was sisterly. Today, it feels too close, too knowing. What I felt wasn't just jealousy. It was the sense of having been fooled by time, that I had lived decades believing in a half-told story, like someone only ever given the chapters that were convenient. But listen, my dear, confronting these memories wasn't just pain. There was also a kind of relief, like finally cleaning out a drawer full of old papers. It takes effort, raises dust, but it makes space. I needed to look at it all again to remember who I was, not just the woman who had been betrayed, but the woman who survived, who raised children, who kept a home, who endured silence and still hummed quietly while washing the dishes. And most of all, a woman who chose to go on, even when the truth came in pieces. I spent days thinking about Lourdes, not just as the woman who appeared in the diary, but as the sister who had shared nearly everything with me. We shared a bedroom, our toys, the sorrow of our father's death, the secrets of girlhood. It was she who used to braid my hair when I was small, she who whispered with me at night, before sleep, about dreams we didn't even know if we truly had or just made up. And now she was also the face of my pain. It took me a long while to decide whether I would go see her. The notebook remained locked away, but the words echoed in my mind. I asked myself, does she know that I know? Has she lived all these years as if nothing ever happened? Or does she carry, like I do, the weight of what was never said? I gathered the courage and went to the care home where she lives now. It's a simple place, clean, quiet, a tidy garden, the scent of lavender in the air. She was seated by a window, staring at nothing, a blanket laid across her lap. When she saw me, she smiled, that same smile from when we were girls, light, a little shy, full of things unsaid. I sat beside her, took her hand, and for a few minutes, we said nothing. We just breathed the same air, felt each other's presence. It was she who spoke first. "You look different, Maria," she said. "Your eyes look more tired." I smiled faintly, unsure whether it was an innocent comment or a veiled confession. "Life gets heavy," I replied. She lowered her eyes. We stayed there in silence a while longer, and then she said, "I still think of him sometimes. I don't know why." It was like a hammer to the chest. She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. I knew, and she knew that I knew. In that moment, everything was there between us, suspended in the air, like a sheet stretched between two windows. I could have asked everything. I could have demanded answers, cried, screamed, but I didn't, because I understood then that her silence was also mine, that we had both chosen, in our own ways, to pretend it had never happened. And somehow, that truth bound us more than it separated us. After a few more minutes, I stood. I kissed her forehead, the way I used to kiss my children's, and I left. I said nothing, and neither did she. But in that silence, there were more words than any quarrel could hold. After everything came to light, the diary, the words, Lourdes's silence, the stirred-up memories, I was left with a strange feeling, as if I were a different woman, or maybe as if I had finally met the woman who'd always been hidden inside me, because something changes in us when we come face to face with the truth. Not the pretty, polished truth of the stories we tell others, but the raw truth, the hard truth, the one that's hard to swallow, the kind of truth you don't speak. You feel it, heavy on your shoulders, the kind you can't unsee. What remained in me, my dear, wasn't just sorrow. It was also a kind of freedom, strange but real, as if I had, at last, stopped trying to please an image that never existed. The ideal husband, the perfect sister, the flawless marriage, all of it a picture I painted and kept hanging, perhaps out of fear of seeing what had always been in front of me. What remained was also a deep tiredness, not of the body, but of the soul. The weariness of having carried so much for so long, of being strong when all I wanted was to fall apart, of smiling when every part of me was screaming, of accepting so little, thinking it was enough. But along with the tiredness came a different kind of strength, not a loud strength, not one that breaks things, but one that endures, that stays, that breathes deeply and keeps going. I look at my story and see that I am not only what was done to me, I am also what I chose to do with it. And I chose not to harden, not to grow bitter, not to shut myself away. I carry within me every version of myself, the little girl who believed in love like in the movies, the young woman who married Joaquim full of hope, the mother who forgot herself for a while, the wife who pretended not to see, and now, the old woman who knows. What remained in me was this: awareness, And that, though it hurts, also comforts. Because truth, even when hard, gave me back to myself. As the months passed, I slowly became used to the presence of the truth. It stopped cutting like a blade and began to ache like arthritis, quiet, but always there. Sometimes it hurt more on rainy days, or in the nights when the wind rattled the windows and my body longed for a familiar warmth. That's when I started asking myself, did I forgive? Because forget, that, I know I didn't. Forgetting is made of time and distraction. And in my case, time passed, but memory stayed. It lingered in everything, in the way I brewed my morning coffee, in the way I made the bed, in the corner of the porch where he used to sit and tie his shoes. Forgetting never came. But forgiveness, maybe that came slowly, without warning, like a little plant growing between the stones. Forgiveness, my dear, is not saying everything is fine. It's not pretending nothing happened, nor denying the pain. It's choosing not to let it define you. It's looking pain in the eye and saying, you're here, but you don't rule me anymore. I learned that on my own. No priest taught me. No neighbor whispered it over the fence. It was time, that same time that doesn't heal everything, but teaches us how to live with what won't heal. Many people confuse forgiveness with weakness. They think to forgive is to surrender, to humiliate yourself. I don't believe that. To me, forgiveness is a kind of courage. It's having the strength not to feed hatred. It's choosing peace, even knowing the wound will ache now and then. I never spoke to Lourdes about what I read. I never brought it up again with anyone. The diary remains stored away, like a scar we don't show, but don't hide either. Did I forgive Joaquim? I don't know. Maybe I only accepted. Maybe the love that remained turned into compassion, a tired compassion, a quiet one, but real. Because loving someone for decades is more than passion. It's coexisting, it's habit, it's a tie. And even when wounded, the tie stays, loose, frayed, but still there. Now I know, forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is remembering, without wanting revenge. I put the notebook away, not out of cowardice, but out of care. Because certain truths, once read, no longer need to be reread. We carry them inside, not in our hands. It's there, at the back of the wardrobe, wrapped in a piece of linen, tied with an old ribbon I found in the sewing drawer. It's not a grave, but it's not a guest book either. It's a part of my life I had to close quietly. I closed the diary, but my heart, that I couldn't and didn't want to close. Because despite the pain, the betrayal, the sleepless nights, and the tears that didn't always fall, I loved. I loved with what I had, with what I knew, with the innocence of someone who believed love was enough. And maybe, for me, it was. Joaquim, with all his silences, was part of my story. A big part, a living part. He wasn't an easy man, nor always fair. And now I know he was never whole, but he was mine, in the way he knew how to be. And I was his, in the way I knew how to give. Time has taught me there is no perfect love. There is only possible love. Love that stays. Love that wounds and still doesn't give up. Love that turns into memory, but not into poison. Today, when I look at the old photos, I don't feel anger. I feel a kind of tenderness I can't quite name. A tenderness for who we were, despite what was missing, for what we built, even with all the cracks along the way. And sometimes, I still dream of him. Quiet dreams. He's sitting on the porch, fiddling with the radio, calling me for coffee. And I go. We sit side by side, in silence, just as we did so many times. Only in the dream, there's no more pain. Just longing, the gentle kind, the kind that soothes instead of hurting. That's why I tell you all this, my child, because I want you to know that living means opening and closing diaries, reading words that lift you, and others that cut, feeling love, losing love, and learning how to rebuild. I close the diary, but my heart remains open, wounded, maybe, but whole in my own way. If you liked Grandma's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can hear more stories like this and share them with other people who might be inspired by this story of overcoming. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a similar situation? How did you react? A kiss on the heart from all of you, and until the next story.